Night inside Versailles had a pulse. The chandeliers trembled with the breath of the court, each candle reflecting 100 small flames in the mirrors. Somewhere beyond the marble galleries, the queen slept, unaware that a storm was already gathering in her name. In 1784, a diamond necklace began its silent journey through Paris, heavy enough to drag a kingdom toward ruin. The piece was vast, 647 stones cold as morning frost, each cut to trap and scatter light like a constellation. It had been crafted years before by the jewelers Baumer and Bassange, who imagined it draped upon the throat of a king's mistress. They called it the finest treasure in Europe, but it was also a wound waiting for an owner. The necklace was first offered to Louis XV, meant for his lover Madame du Barry. Yet the king died before he could buy it, and the diamonds were left without a neck to rest upon. For years, the jewelers sought a buyer. None could bear the price, 1.6 million livres, a sum so vast it might have fed a city. Versailles, for all its mirrors, was already cracking under debt. The court pretended not to notice. Marie Antoinette had been offered the necklace twice and refused it both times. She had jewels enough, she said, and after the birth of her son, it would have seemed cruel to flaunt such extravagance before a starving people. But rumors always outpaced truth. The people of France whispered that the queen had a hunger for diamonds as insatiable as her vanity. They did not see her pale, sleepless nights or her restless fear of being hated. In the corners of the salons, a name began to move with the lightness of perfume, Jeanne de la Motte. She called herself a countess, born of noble blood, though her true father had been a provincial adventurer. She had charm, a face that remembered beauty, and a genius for deceit. Her husband was a petty swindler. Together they drifted on the edges of nobility, hungry for gold and recognition. It was Jeanne who would weave the trap that ensnared a cardinal, a queen, and the conscience of France. She claimed friendship with Marie Antoinette, claiming to carry private letters between the queen and her allies. Whispers spread that she had even visited the queen's secret apartments at night. The court loved such stories. They scented scandal like blood in water. Historians agree that Jeanne never had such intimacy. It was palace gossip, born from envy and boredom. What cannot be disputed, however, is her cunning. By winter of 1784, the desperate jewelers sought someone who might help sell their unsold masterpiece. Jeanne appeared, soft-spoken and confident, offering a solution. She would persuade the queen, she said. After all, Her Majesty trusted her completely. And when she returned weeks later, she brought news that thrilled the jewelers. The queen had agreed to buy the necklace, but through a discreet intermediary. The man would be of high rank, one whose favor had long been uncertain. Cardinal Louis de Rohan. Rohan was a proud man and a fool of reputation. Once the ambassador to Vienna, he had offended Empress Maria Theresa, Marie Antoinette's mother, with his arrogance. The queen despised him for it and kept him at a distance. To regain her favor became his obsession. When Jeanne de la Motte whispered that the queen wished to reconcile, his heart, dulled by ambition, began to burn again. He believed her letters, her signs, her every invented gesture. According to court rumor, the queen had written him in secret, thanking him for his devotion, even confessing affection. But historians agree these letters were forgeries, penned by Jeanne and her lover, Rétaux de Villette. Still, Rohan wanted to believe, and so he agreed to act as the queen's agent in purchasing the necklace. The transaction was arranged like a ghostly play. The jewelers handed over the diamonds to Rohan, who promised that the queen would repay them in installments. He even produced a document bearing Marie Antoinette's signature, a perfect imitation. In early February 1785, the necklace passed from the jeweler's hands into the cardinal's keeping. From there, it vanished. Jeanne's husband fled France soon after, the diamonds broken apart and sold across Europe. When payment never arrived, the jewelers sent polite inquiries to the queen's household. Confusion spread, then fear. The queen's attendants denied any knowledge. The king's ministers began to suspect fraud, and when a banker came forward with news that the cardinal had sought a massive loan on behalf of the queen, the illusion shattered. At last, the king summoned Cardinal de Rohan to Versailles. It was the Feast of the Assumption, August 15th, 1785. The palace smelled of incense and candle smoke. The Queen, radiant and cold, stood beside Louis XVI as the guards brought the cardinal before them. Rohan still believed he had acted in her service. When the king demanded to know why he had purchased a necklace in the Queen's name, Rohan stammered that it was her wish. He even reached for a letter, now lost, that he swore had come from her own hand. The Queen's face hardened. She declared she had written no such letter, given no such command. The silence that followed was heavier than any verdict. The king ordered Rohan arrested and taken to the Bastille. As he left the hall, his crimson robes brushed against the marble like blood. The Bastille swallowed the cardinal like a tomb. The gates shut with a moan of iron, echoing through the corridors of power. Paris awoke to a storm of speculation. In the salons and coffee houses, in the theaters and taverns, one question burned through the air. Had the Queen of France betrayed her throne for diamonds? No one knew the truth, yet everyone spoke it. Some claimed that the Queen and the Cardinal had been secret lovers, that the jewels were a gift of passion disguised as a purchase. Others swore the Queen had tricked the church to feed her vanity. In the slums, pamphlets sold by the thousands, showing the Queen half-clothed, draped in the forbidden necklace. The images were obscene and cruel, but they spread faster than fire. Versailles became a house of whispers. Inside her chambers, Marie Antoinette trembled with fury. She demanded justice. She wanted the cardinal humiliated before the same court that had once bowed to him. Her husband, Louis XVI, believed that a public trial would clear her name. He still trusted reason, but reason was already slipping from France like light from a broken window. Jeanne de la Motte, confined in her cell, began to craft her own defense. She was clever enough to see where the wind was turning. She told the guards that she had acted only to serve the Queen, that the purchase had been the monarch's wish. When questioned by officials, she spoke in circles, alluding to secrets too dangerous to name. Outside the walls, her words became legend. According to the talk of the court, Jeanne had arranged secret meetings between the Queen and the Cardinal, beneath the moonlit trees of Versailles. They said the Queen herself had appeared, veiled, soft-voiced, accepting a rose from the man who adored her. But historians agree this was no queen, only an actress named Nicole d'Oliva. What cannot be disputed, however, is that the lie worked too well. The people of France chose to believe the fiction. In the spring of 1786, the trial opened. Crowds pressed against the Palais de Justice like waves against stone. The Parlement of Paris had not seen such spectacle in living memory. Nobles and commoners, clergy and beggars, all came to witness the fall of their betters. The cardinal, pale and trembling, stood before his judges. Jeanne de la Motte, dressed with mock dignity, met his gaze without flinching. The jewelers spoke of their ruin. The forged letters were read aloud, their false tenderness twisting through the chamber. The Queen was not present, but her image filled every corner of the room. Every sigh, every whisper, every painted caricature carried her name. Outside, pamphlets accused her of every vice a woman could possess. They said she had spent France's fortune on silk and sin. They called her Madame Deficit, the Austrian witch who had bewitched their king. Truth had long since lost its pulse. Within the walls of Versailles, the king's ministers begged him to silence the spectacle, to spare the monarchy this humiliation. But Louis, a man of conscience more than cunning, refused. He still believed that justice, once seen, would restore faith. Instead, it fed the fire. The Countess de la Motte spun her story with venom. She told the court that the Queen had written her letters of affection, that the Queen had ordered the necklace through secret channels, that the Queen herself had embraced the Cardinal in the gardens of Trianon. Each lie came smoother than the last. The judges watched, uncertain, caught between duty and fear. By May, the verdicts fell like hammers. Jeanne was condemned to be whipped and branded on the shoulder with a V for voleuse, thief, before being imprisoned for life. Her husband, still in England selling the broken diamonds, was sentenced in absence to the galleys. Rétaux de Villette, the forger, was exiled. Then came the verdict for the cardinal. Against all expectation, he was acquitted. The news spread before the ink was dry. Bells rang through Paris as if for a coronation. Crowds filled the bridges and the squares, shouting his name. They saw him as a martyr to royal cruelty, a man wronged by a foreign queen. The monarchy had hoped for vindication. Instead, it had declared its own weakness. In Versailles, the queen collapsed into her husband's arms. She could not understand how innocence had become guilt, how the people she had once ruled through grace now mocked her in the streets. Louis promised that the storm would pass. She looked at him with the silence of someone who no longer believed in dawn. The cardinal, though freed, was ruined. His ambition turned to ashes. He retreated to his estate where he lived out his days surrounded by relics of false devotion. Jeanne, however, would not stay caged. In 1787, she escaped the Salpêtrière disguised as a man, her branded shoulder hidden beneath a dark coat. She fled to London, where her voice became more dangerous than any dagger. In exile, she wrote her memoirs. Page after page, she painted Marie Antoinette as a creature of sin, a woman who seduced priests, who betrayed her husband, who laughed at the suffering of France. She accused her of secret rites, of unholy passions, of crimes that never happened. Yet the world believed her. The pamphlets, printed in thousands, crossed the channel like a disease. Paris devoured them. Each lie added another stone to the queen's coffin. By the summer of 1789, the name of Marie Antoinette had become a curse. The storming of the Bastille began not only from hunger and rage, but from the slow poisoning of her image. The affair of the diamond necklace had turned her into the nation's mirror. Every vice, every cruelty, every vanity reflected upon her face. Even when she spoke with dignity, the crowd heard only deceit. When the revolution deepened and the royal family was dragged back from Versailles to Paris, the people shouted insults that had been born from the necklace affair. They threw the old pamphlets at the royal carriage. They cried for justice, meaning vengeance. The queen had become the ghost of her own scandal. Years later, in the gray dawn of October 16, 1793, she stood before the guillotine. Her hair was shorn, her face lined but unbowed. The crowd jeered, yet she carried herself with a calm beyond defiance. To many, she was still the woman of diamonds, the temptress who had ruined France. Few remembered that she had refused the necklace from the beginning. The blade fell. The mob roared. And somewhere in London, Jeanne de la Motte heard the news and smiled. She died a few years later, thrown from a window while fleeing creditors, her body broken on the stones. The diamonds she had scattered across Europe were long gone, but their curse remained. Versailles, once the world stage, became a hollow shell. Dust settled on the chandeliers, weeds pushed through the courtyards. The mirrors still caught light, but only from empty halls. History remembered the necklace as a scandal, a crime, a folly. Yet beneath it lay something deeper, a warning about the power of rumor, the hunger of crowds, and the fragility of truth when draped in gold. Whispers spread that the necklace still survives, buried in some forgotten chest, its stones carrying the reflection of a fallen queen. But historians agree this is only myth. What cannot be disputed, however, is that its story never truly ended. Every age finds its own necklace, its own illusion of splendor and guilt. And so the question lingers in the dust of Versailles. When power is wrapped in beauty and lies, which breaks first, the crown or the mirror that reflects it?